Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have another, well, let's not say another because he's a repeat guest and he's one of the favorites on this podcast, and that is Brandon the Cruz. And more and more over the weeks, over the months, we are merging towards a chase of more muscle because we're realizing the benefits of a more muscular, stronger physique. It's just that the word muscular usually freaks a lot of women out. And the way we are taught that this body is built, that lean body that you see online, that you see in magazines. Do people even still use magazines? That you see in the gym, that you see that chick that's on the stair mill kicking her foot back in the air, thinking that that's what got her that body, or this other chick doing something on Instagram, doing this one exercise because she's trying to promote this new next fancy thing, wanting her body. It's like we're sold all these different things, but what is the way? People want physique change, but we're sold numbers most of the time. BMI, scale weights, the most inaccurate body fat percentages, because people are so obsessed with, well, if I can't weigh myself, why don't I just get a body fat percentage, which is just as detrimental and toxic for most people because the devices, especially the in bodies, are so inaccurate, and other fancy things that I just mentioned. And I don't know about you guys, but once you start chasing lean, it gets hard to detach yourself from that pursuit, in that, well, it's working. If I take a step back or if I start eating more, I'm just going to gain fat. I can't allow myself to eat more. And my history was, she looks leaner. That must be cutting out carbs, doing more cardio, or maybe more hit, because if I do cardio, I might lose my muscle. Oh, but maybe if I do a lot more reps, a lot more sets, do more work in the gym, I can actually stay lean and build muscle at the same time and achieve this goddess physique. But it just made me look worse. So here is now Brandon to debunk all of that bullshit, because we know now that the most important factor, the king of building muscle, is your resistance training. Only most people approach their resistance training in the wrong manner, as I just mentioned one example. So I'll let you take it off from there in starting with training. How training is the most important part of the equation, what most people get wrong with it, and how we should actually approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that intro is a great all-encompassing summary of what we as coaches see. Many people come to us, especially women, and they're misinformed and they're misled in terms of what they think their ideal body composition requires, or what is going to get them to the process of building that lean, tight, toned physique that they want. A lot of times, they're focused mostly on diet. They're mostly focused on restricting themselves and doing excess cardio and doing boot camp classes and high intensity workouts. And they don't realize just the vast amount of benefits that could come from spending time focusing on building muscle. And so when we look at, like, if we were to just look at like the mechanisms of muscle growth, or how do we induce muscle growth on a mechanistic level, we see that we need to have our rates of muscle protein synthesis exceed our rates of muscle protein breakdown. And there's two main ways to do that. So the first is to engage in progressive resistance training, because that's going to increase both muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. And it's going to be eating adequate protein intake, which increases muscle protein synthesis and decreases protein degradation, which is also referred to as muscle protein breakdown. And this is where a lot of people go wrong, because if you really look at, like, I do a ton of consultations, and at this point, over half of my clientele are women. And so when I'm doing a consultation with them, I encounter a lot of women who say that they have the goal of improving their body composition and they want to do so through resistance training. But when I consult with a new female client, I often see that the manner that they train isn't conducive for the physique goals that they're looking to achieve. It's a lot of high intensity workouts. It's a lot of supersets and drop sets and all these just different intensity techniques. They're basically chasing fatigue rather than actually going to induce a training stimulus. And so a lot of women, when they're training, they're more focused on that feeling of fatigue, of getting sweaty, of working up a sweat and feeling tired with their training. And they're less focused on actually providing their bodies and their muscles with a stimulus that will actually maximize muscle growth. And that's what's going to give you the body you're looking for. And add in the fact that there's so much info out there that it can be difficult for women to decide who to listen to and who not to listen to, especially as you kind of mentioned this about the women that kick back their legs on the stairmaster and things like that. There are so many women which are genetic outliers, and they have these really large social media followings where they post different swipe workouts every single day. And many times I find that this leads women in the general population to program hopping and to trying a new workout every week rather than focusing on consistently following a program and focusing on improving their training performance over time. So personally, I found the best way to go about maximizing hypertrophy, which is just the process of muscle growth for both myself and clients, is to combine what I found to work best with the majority of my clients over the years with the principles that we've have been shown to maximize muscle growth in the peer-reviewed literature. So when it comes to building muscle, we really want to dial in different aspects and different training programming variables. And most of that is going to be really dialing in your volume, your relative intensity, which is your proximity to failure, and your loading zone and rep ranges. So when we look at the training research and we compare low versus high volumes, we see like a small effect size, favoring higher volumes, leading to more muscle growth. However, we don't always see that in the actual individual studies that it lines up with that. So I'll tell you, like in practice with clients, I have some who respond much better to high volume programs, and then I have others who respond better to lower volume programs. Whereas I'd say the good majority respond best to striking a balance between the two by starting low and then working up to a moderate volume program that they can actually sustain and progress with over time. And the reason I want to allude to that, I just want to talk about these differences in what we would refer to as response heterogeneity, which is the individual responses between people, is because a lot of women will see what other females that have physiques that they're looking to achieve, what they're doing. And so they want to emulate that or they want to follow that. And what you guys have to realize is that you cannot compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 10. So if someone is a really advanced trainee, they are a physique competitor, they are a professional athlete, or they might be a fitness model who gets paid full time just to train, and they've been training for a much longer period of time than you cannot compare their training to what you should be doing. It's the same thing as if I decided that I was going to run a marathon, for instance, and I looked at endurance athletes and I formulated my training based off there. Like if I started running the mileage that they ran on a weekly basis, I would be honestly crushed because I'm not acclimated, I'm not adjusted to that, and it's not suited for where I'm at right now. So first we have volume. You have to customize that to the individual. You need to see your own response, your recovery capacity, and what is really allowing you to get a good stimulus while also balancing the recovery aspect of that so you can continue performing in the gym. The next thing we need to look at is relative intensity within our training, which essentially just refers to our proximity to failure. And you need to focus on training close to failure to maximize muscle growth. And generally, what I like to have clients do is I start their mesocycle around 2 to 3 reps from failure, depending on the movement. So with, say, compound movements like a squat or a pressing motion, I'll have them train 3 reps away from failure. Whereas with isolation movements, we're going to start 1 to 2 reps from failure. But as we get deeper into the mesocycle, I really like to include several weeks of training to failure, as this not only provides a great stimulus, but it helps many of the women that I work with to gain a better understanding of how hard they can push themselves. And with each mesocycle that we work on together, they are able to recalibrate what true muscular failure is to them. Because a big issue that I see, and Ruby, I'm sure you can relate to this, and you've seen it in your own training or you're reviewing, client videos and things of that sort, is that a lot of women are training to hit a point of fatigue, but they've never really trained to failure. They've never pushed themselves to their maximum capacity. And a lot of times that's kind of developed self-limiting beliefs of how strong they can be, of how hard they can really push themselves. And you really need to bring yourself outside of your comfort zone to really be able to induce a muscle growth stimulus. You can't be scared to push yourself. Yeah.
Can I just say, this is why
Absolutely.
I reckon it's more important to not just say, let's just go to 1 or 2 reps from failure. Let's push to failure on everything, because your idea of failure most likely is not failure. There are the outliers that actually push themselves to the extreme limits. But if you look at the majority of people, there is always about 5 left in the tank. And there was
Absolutely.
a girl in particular that I gave AMRAP on the last set of the same weight. It was 10 to 12 as a rep range. The AMRAP with the same weight was, I think she got 22. And I'm like, does this now show you that what you've been using for the past however many weeks was too light? So push to failure. And all this noise that you're seeing online, you need to just hone in on your own path.
No, absolutely. So I will say that I actually, a lot of times how I program is I start them off. It's a descending intensity rep, or it's a descending intensity scheme essentially. So we're starting off a little bit further from failure and then working towards, because really what I'm trying to, I want them to, practice does not make perfection, but perfect practice makes better execution over time. So I want them to execute with a movement at a really good proficiency and gain that um, technical proficiency of executing the movement. So I'll start them a little further away from failure in terms of their compound movements. But a lot of times with isolations, I'm having them take it to the house within the first 2 to 3 weeks that we're in a mesocycle. And that's really to be able to gauge how hard can you push yourself. So when I speak about 2 to 3 reps away from failure, even that first week, that's a true 2 to 3 reps. Like I work with many intermediate or advanced trainees. So I'm looking over training footage and things of that sort to be able to spot check them on that and to be able to be objective with them and say, listen, I think you actually had 4 to 5 reps in the tank on that set. Let's redo it next week. And so within that, I am a big advocate of having several weeks. And sometimes women will ask me, they're like, you're going to have me train, like this is week 3 or 4 of training to failure. And I'm like, yeah, because you continue increasing your reps across every week that we go from microcycle to microcycle or training week to training week, you still have more left. And so it's not only from the physical capacity, because if you really look at the literature on training to failure, there is a dose response in terms of the closer you get in terms of proximity to failure, the closer you get to failure, the greater stimulus. But within that, it also induces greater amounts of fatigue. But the other aspect of that, it's not only the physiological benefits of having a client push to failure, it's also the psychological benefits. It is the growth that they get from a mental perspective and a mindset perspective. And anyone out there that's listening to this, if you were an athlete and you really push yourself, I actually find this to be most prevalent with endurance athletes. They have a pain threshold, which is like none other, because they're so used to doing so much mileage or so much training at, even if it's at a moderate intensity, but they're used to being able to push their pain perception. And so this is a part of the training process, really getting yourself outside your comfort zone and realizing that training is meant to be challenging. Training is meant to be difficult and hard. And that is how we induce a greater stimulus. You have to force that adaptation. And then the last component of training that I like to look into is loading range, because we see, similar outcomes, whether you use low loads or high loads between the rep ranges of say around 5 reps to 30 reps. As long as the amount of sets that you're doing and the proximity to failure are equated between conditions. So when we talk about training for muscle growth, there's a lot of room for individual and customized programming. As hypertrophy is, honestly, it's a forgiving adaptation. However, one thing I really do try to drive home with all of my clients, especially my women, that this is one aspect of training I will say that a lot of women have come to me, they have not implemented into their programming. And it really is, I don't want to say it's a secret, but it is like a hack to better gains, to say the least. And that is focusing on improving performance over time to induce overload, because overload is meeting or exceeding a sufficient stimulus that's required to produce that adaptation from training. And so to grow muscle, to really transform your physique, you need to meet a sufficient level of tension stimulus to increase muscle protein synthesis and put yourself in a state of positive protein balance, which is, from a molecular level, that is what you need to transform your physique. So progressive overload is achieved when we meet that requisite tension stimulus and see a progression in performance as a result. Now, the thing is, the threshold needed to overload and hit a sufficient stimulus increases over time. So realize that what you were doing in week 1 of your mesocycle is not going to be sufficient when we're 20 weeks into a training cycle together. Like, you are going to get better over time, and as should your training performance. So over time, we need to increase the stimulus within our training as our training capacity improves and develops. And that is one thing that a lot of people miss out on. If you ever look around, and I want everyone out there that's in the audience to think about this, look around your gym and watch how many people do the exact same things, the exact same amount of reps and load on their exercises. It's that guy you see on the bench is doing 225. He's been doing 225 for 10 years and he hasn't grown worth of shit. It's like they're doing the same things and they're getting the same results. And that's honestly the definition of insanity. It's the same thing from a dietary perspective. If you just continue spinning your wheels and over dieting yourself and always staying in this deprived mindset where you're always focused on subtraction and restriction, you're never going to build your body. And the same thing can be said about your training. We need to focus on improving performance over time. So the one thing I really focus on heavily, especially with the women I work with, is aiming to get stronger over time, which is something that I really find women neglect. And Ruby, I know that you're someone that pushes yourself, especially from a strength perspective. So I'm sure you could open up and relate on this, but this doesn't mean, and I want to delineate this. when I say that I want my women to get stronger over time, it's not that I'm expecting, and nor should they expect, that they're going to get stronger on a week to week basis, especially if they're years into training. However, you should go into each and every session looking to exceed last week's performance, aka to do more than last time. But progressing just in a session isn't necessary technically from an overload perspective, as no one can like linearly increase and progress their training performance week in and week out throughout an entire training career. And so what we have to realize is muscle growth is a long, slow process. So it's not like we have to increase the tension stimulus via whether that be weight or even adding reps each week, but rather we need to make sure that we're providing a sufficient tension stimulus by hitting a requisite threshold ranges. So that's going to mean you got to hit a requisite range for both your volume and your intensity. So you have to have sufficient volume to provide the dose needed to adapt and sufficient intensity to ensure we're recruiting all motor units and getting close to failure. And so really when it comes down to this, my biggest intention, and when I speak to my clients about training, it's like, listen, we have to check a bunch of boxes. But the biggest thing about all of this is we can't continue to do the same thing. We can do the same movements, but you need to get better over time. You need to focus on adding reps, adding weight, getting more, getting better technical proficiency at something. So maybe executing a movement with a greater range of motion, or having a cleaner execution of that movement so that you get better over time. And so really when it comes down to training, that is how you're going to build your body. And a lot of the ways that people train, especially currently in the gym, it's just not conducive for what they want out of their body. They want a physique that has a really, they want a lean muscular physique, but they train like someone that is just training for fitness. And there's a big difference between body composition improvement and just training to improve just your general fitness level. So really when it comes down to it, that is what is going to be the key to driving your body composition forward.
I have so much that I want to say around training now, because this is the first opportune time. Yesterday, I just put up a post on Instagram, and I want to go through the slides with you very soon. But you mentioned progressive overload, and I feel like so many people are chasing progressive overload when you shouldn't. It's a byproduct of you getting stronger. It's a byproduct of you building muscle. And that happens exactly as you said, from showing up in order to give your best effort, in order to push yourself, in order to give that very best for that day. Progressive overload is then a byproduct, because if you're always chasing PRs, you will do that at a detriment to actually loading the target muscle, because then all these other conversations are going to come in place, whether it's your heart, whether it's your mind, whether it's the fact that now you're loading your quads instead of your glutes, or you're doing these funky movements with your body that does not actually standardize the reps. Which is why it's really important to build the skill of training hard, build the skill of being freaking patient in the process, because it is a much slower process than fat loss. And this is why I always say that progress in reality is what happens when you're not dieting. When you're dieting, you're putting progress on hold. You're just revealing what you've already done. That's the best way I like to see it, because people feel like maintenance and building muscle or going into a surplus is not progressing, or there's nothing to actually cling to, because now you're not looking at, again, the scales, the numbers going down. It's no, when the scale and numbers are going down, the progress over there is on hold. You're not building muscle, you're not building your physique. You're revealing what you've done, and that is a timed thing. There's a limited time on that, because then as you listen to the last two podcasts that Brandon and I did were about the detriments of forever dieting, forever chasing lean, and the metabolic repercussions of not listening. Well, actually, not listening to your body. But to quickly go back to the start of it, those people that you see doing whatever that they're doing, it's in spite of what they do, not because of what they do. And it's not just that people are chasing fatigue, they're also chasing entertainment. And they want overly complicated stuff versus overly effective stuff. And there was something Lyle McDonald said that stuck with me for ages, and that was they're chasing more complicated versus just doing what's effective. And in the outcome of that, they're not really getting what they want, because now there's too much noise in their head. But I want to go through a little back and forth on all of the slides in my last post to get your take on it, and a little spiel of everything. And it's about the mistakes that people make when they train. The first one is they just walk into the gym and they chuck the weight on the bar that they need to do, but they're not doing warm-up sets to get to the working sets. So they're pretty much junk sets. That's on one end. But then on the other end, there are people doing like 3 sets of 10 as a warm up versus let's do a effective warm up scheme with the weights to get to your working sets, because now you're just fatiguing yourself. So what can we say about working sets, warm up sets, and the effective way to see results there?
Absolutely. So when it comes to warm-ups, I will say that warming up is a really interesting topic to say the least, because a lot of people do something that they think is a warm-up, but really is just either wasting their time first and foremost, or they're just inducing more fatigue onto themselves. So you have, let's look at, like, say, the avatars in the gym that you see. You have the person that goes in there, they do foam rolling, they do static stretching, they have a 45-minute warm-up routine. By the time they get to their workout, they have about 30 minutes left in their schedule. They do a shit workout and they leave the gym without inducing any type of stimulus. And then you have other people that literally do the opposite. They walk right in, and like you said, they load the bar and they go right into heavy sets. And really, they're putting themselves at a higher predisposition, because their body's not warm first and foremost, to they're putting themselves at a higher predisposition for injury, but they're also not getting the maximum performance and motor unit recruitment out of their sets. So really, when I look at warming up, I try to get across to my clients that we want to use, and I use these particular words, I utilize the term ramp up sets. I want you to ramp up into the working sets that you're going to be utilizing. So really what that looks like is I want you to utilize a weight. I want you to start with a low weight. So this is how I describe it to clients. For instance, your first set on an exercise, how I want them warming up, besides they could do a general warm up if they want to do, 10 minutes on, say, an elliptical or on a treadmill, just to get their actual body temperature up. But really, all these really long, complicated warm up routines and mobility routines, those aren't really necessary, nor do we see in the literature that they're actually beneficial. Really, what you want to do is anything that's going to increase your core body temperature. So that could even be just going to the gym in a sweatshirt. Or if you're in a hot, warm weather climate, there's actually very interesting studies out of Brazil where it's super warm and they don't see any benefit in the literature that they do research down in Brazil because of the climate, any benefit to actually doing warm-up routines. So that's really just showing you that if the body's already warm, you can go into your working set. So you want to utilize the exercise that you are going to be training with as your warm-up. So for instance, if we are doing a squat pattern, we're doing a hack squat, let's start with 50% of our working weight for 10 reps. And then let's do a descending rep pattern where you're not gassing out and actually inducing fatigue, but you're slowly building up to your actual working weight. So generally what I like having clients do is their first warm-up set will be, say, a set of 8 to 10 reps with 50% of their working weight, their actual loading weight. Then from there, I'll do between 75 to 80% of their working weight and do between 4 and 6 reps. And then what I like them to do is actually go to their 100% of their working weight. So the exact weight they're going to be working at, and this will be another option, I'll talk about post-activation potentiation. But first, I'll have them do a set of 2 with their actual working weight. I want you to feel the weight. I want you to be able to handle that load and just get the neurological activation of recruitment of how you're going to be able to execute this with great form. So this is just priming your motor, essentially your central nervous system, to be ready to handle those loads when you actually go into your working sets. Another strategy I'll utilize with a lot of my advanced clients is actually doing what's called a post-activation potentiation set. This is more from the powerlifting aspect, but we actually see better volume performance when you do a heavier, so say, for instance, say you do 100 kilograms. I'm going to use kilograms because you're over there. So I won't use US Freedom Units. But say you're doing 100 kilograms on a squat. This is just a hypothetical number, going to 110% of your load and doing just 1 rep. And not fatiguing yourself in that, because generally, if you were to look at that, 110% of a weight that you would usually do, 100 kilograms on for 10 reps is probably like a 5 to 6 rep max. So you're just doing 1 rep, but it's just getting that neurological recruitment, utilizing a heavier weight. And how I try to phrase this to clients is, think about if you did a heavier weight, when you were to do, and this is a great example of this, a lot of times I'll have clients do a top set and a back off set. The reason I have them do a top set first is because they're going to be stronger within that movement. And also think about it logically. When you do a higher rep set, say for instance, Ruby, I'm going to give you this example. If you were to do, say we do the opposite. So a lot of people do like this descending rep pattern where they start with high reps and then they go to low reps. And it's like, you're inducing fatigue the whole time, and then you're trying to do your top set and your highest working set. But now you've induced all this metabolite-related fatigue, all this calcium ion-related fatigue, and you're actually limiting your ability to recruit high-threshold motor units when you go to that higher rep. So say, for instance, if you were to do, we're going to do a hypothetical workout. So say I have you do a top set of 6 to 10 reps or 6 to 8 reps, and then a back off set of 10 to 15 reps. And that's just your rep ranges. Say we did the opposite. And this is what a lot of people do. They'll start with the 15 and then 12 and then 10, and then they're going for like a 6 rep max. If you fail, say if you really go to true failure on your 15 rep max, you should not be able to do any load that is heavier than that. So that means you shouldn't be able to do your 14 rep max, your 13 rep max. So when you go to do your 10 rep max on that next set, you actually can physically cannot, you're not capable of actually doing that. But if we do the opposite, we do a 6, I really like doing 5 to 7 reps. So I'll start the first top set at 5 to 7 reps. Say that you hit, your 5 rep max on a set. Yes, you cannot do your 4 rep max, your 3 rep max, your 2 rep max, or your 1 rep max, but you could certainly do a 10 rep max because you have not induced that much metabolic fatigue from utilizing a higher rep set. And so really what I like people to do is do warm-ups, get to a weight or get to a load where they're ready to do actual working sets and actually get the maximum amount of motor unit recruitment from that. But a lot of people, they kind of train like they're almost doing they're doing a bunch of warm-up sets as their working sets. And that's just not inducing a great enough stimulus. So a lot of people, they almost utilize like their first 3 out of 4 working sets as a warm-up, which is just inducing fatigue and not getting maximum stimulus. And so really I would I would encourage people to flip that situation, really go for utilizing more stimulating sets by getting closer to failure and actually making sure that you delineate and you differentiate your warm-up sets from your actual working sets. It shouldn't be that you should, if you're, say that you have your first exercise of the day and it's 3 sets of 10 reps, you shouldn't be doing 3 to 4 sets of 10 reps as your warm-up. There makes no logical sense to do that.
I laughed pretty much all the way through that because the last few weeks I've been getting so many questions from my clients saying, wait, I just realized that you gave me the heavier sets first. I've been doing it the other way around because it doesn't make sense to me. That's the way I've always done it. It's like, why would you fatigue yourself before your maximum set? And something that I've also realized from doing it this way with this approach is you're stimulating so many more muscle fibers by training with such intensity at first. So then when you do get to, like, for example, I have 5 to 7 for a lot of my girls as well. I have 5 to 7 or 6 to 8, and then I have the higher rep ranges. As soon as you get to those higher rep ranges for the last 2 sets, you are now recruiting a lot more muscle fibers because you've just made them go, oh, hello, during the first set. And now you might also, which I experience myself because it's the way that I approach many of my exercises, you feel things in the right areas, quote unquote, a lot better now because, well, at least I feel that way as well because I just did that heavier set. And now that I'm dropping the weight back, I just feel it better. It's more effective because I've now got to that place of, okay, hello, my muscles are working. So
no, absolutely. We can look at like the deep granular mechanisms of this, go through like Henneman's size principle. Like for instance, if you do a rep or you do a set of 5 to 7 reps, you're getting maximum motor unit recruitment. Generally, we see around 80 to 85% of your 1 repetition max, which for most people, and now it ranges between fiber type makeup and your gender. But for most people, that's like 5 to 8 rep max. You're going to get full motor unit recruitment, meaning you're going to recruit your low threshold motor units and your high threshold motor units. And your high threshold motor units are those that not only are they harder to recruit first and foremost, but they're also capable of greater hypertrophy or greater growth. However, we can even discard that. That is actually physiologically how it works. However, let's think about it like this, just from a logical perspective. And I always ask my clients, I always go back to this because I want them to really be able to connect things in a way that it cuts through the complexity and it really gives them clarity on a topic. And I ask them, listen, when you have done your 15 rep max or your 15 rep sets or 15, 12 rep sets and then gone to heavier weights, how do you feel during those heavier weights? Often they can't perform as well. They have a lot of difficulty increasing, whether it be load week to week or even reps week to week. However, when we do it the opposite way, I always tell them, listen, when you've done a really heavy, working set of 5 to 7 reps, and then you lighten it up and you lighten the load to be able to do a 10 to 15 rep max on your back offset, how does it feel? Yes, it's difficult because you get a lot of peripheral fatigue within the muscle in terms of metabolic buildup, but that load feels a lot lighter because you just went through a set where you have pushed yourself with a much higher load. So it is just a differentiation. I almost look at that as almost in and of itself like a post-activation potentiation where you're able to push yourself. And we actually see that within like the post-activation potentiation literature, which you can get if you do a heavier set first and then follow it by a lighter loaded set, you will get better volume performance, so more reps. So really, when it comes down to it, I really find that to be a much more effective way of approaching programming, especially from like a loading range perspective. But also, we also see there was just a recent meta regression that was by Zach Robinson. And when we actually look at what it takes to induce a great amount of hypertrophy, they actually found that with higher load sets in lower rep ranges, meaning above, and this was actually technically, it was 77.5% of one rep max or above. So let's just call that 80% of one rep max or above. So sets that are around between 8 to 10 rep max and below, you are able to actually get a sufficient tension stimulus without going to failure. So you can actually be 2 to 3 reps away from failure and get a very equivalent stimulus that you would going to failure with a higher rep set. Now, here's the issue with that, or here's the situation. We can actually utilize a higher loaded set first as your top set and stay, say, 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 reps away from failure and still get a great hypertrophy stimulus. And then when we go to our back off sets, which are in slightly higher rep ranges, we need to take that to the house. So if you are to do a top set at a very high rep or a very high loading range, meaning that you utilize, say, the rep range of 5 to 7 reps and you utilize 80 to 85% of your one rep max, and you guys don't have to do these calculations, just push a weight that feels very challenging for 5 to 7 reps. You don't even have to go to failure on that. However, we do know that in order to maximize hypertrophy, from a training perspective, in higher rep ranges, especially with those with 12 reps or higher, you have to get to failure, because that is the only way you're going to actually fully stimulate and fully activate all your motor units. So really, when it comes down to it, this is a much more conducive approach to not only balancing out the stimulus to fatigue ratio, but also making sure that you're getting full, motor unit recruitment and you're having a really productive workout, rather than tiring yourself out in these beginning sets by doing high reps and kind of like utilizing them as like a working / warm-up set, and then getting into your heavier reps where you should be trying to, or your heavier loads, which you should be trying to progress your performance over time, and just being way too fatigued to do so.
I'm in love with this conversation because this is like my passion. And I do remember studying like the literature on that one, and I heard the recent one as well, which is why I've started to do this more in my approach, because I just love everything training. But there was like, when I, for example, approach it in that sense, I'll lead on to the next one very soon because it kind of feeds off this. But when I do that approach as well, I will find that for my last 2 back off sets, I will actually have to reduce the weight again for my 3rd set because I am pushing myself that much. And I think a lot of people feel like that is failure if they have to drop the weight. But sometimes if you can't get the same reps on your 2nd set or your 3rd set or your 4th set, that is a good sign, because that's showing that you're pushing yourself. If you might have to reduce the weight for your 2nd set or your 3rd set, that might be a good sign. Well, I think it's a good sign because that's showing that you're pushing yourself. For example, my RDLs, I'm going to use kilograms as well. I would do 120 kilos for my first set of 8. And then I would then drop it back for my 2nd set. But then I would be like, okay, my whole body is involuntarily shaking for this 2nd set. I need to drop the weight for the 3rd set. So I would take another 10 kilos off. And it's almost like I never took the weight off because my body is acting in the same way. And that is you doing effective reps, effective sets, and making that first exercise count the way that it should, which now leads on to junk volume and junk reps, which with junk reps, I want to add on to this. There are now so many people saying, just add on a drop set, just add on this, just add on that. But if you're adding in all these random bits and pieces every single week or every random week or whenever the hell you feel like it, where's the standardization for progression? Where's the standardization for you moving anywhere? And if you're then complaining about the fact that you're not seeing any changes, your performance is going down, your strength is going down, I wonder why. You're just adding to your fatigue. You're just adding to the recoverability, well, the lack of recoverability that you're able to do, because you're just adding in whatever you want because you didn't feel it burn enough. You didn't feel it hit you effectively enough. And then there's the junk volume, which is kind of around the same in that you're making up for lack of intensity with more sets, more exercises, more reps. And if you come into a session where there's 8 different leg exercises, tell me that you mentally want to push yourself the way that I just did for my RDLs. Tell me that you mentally want to push yourself the way that Brandon just explained, with giving your all for that first set and then pushing yourself to that failure point, to understanding what failure feels like. You're going to be thinking about the fact that you have another hour left of leg exercises. You get to the 5th exercise and it's just like, I can't do this anymore. And that is something that you and I know you see it a lot when your females come to you saying, this is what my program looks like at the moment, and moving on from there. So let's talk a little bit about that before we move into exercise selection.
Yeah, so when it comes to you're talking about two different aspects. So when we look at drop sets, they are a time effective strategy. However, you do have to do more drop sets. So say for instance, someone is very time poor. That's just a terminology I use for clients that have very limited time to train. It is a time effective strategy in terms of being able to get a similar stimulus to straight sets, but you have to do much more drop sets. So generally when we look in the literature, say like 3 regular traditional sets, you would need to do 4 to 5 drop sets to be able to get an equivalent hypertrophy, but you're not going to see the same performance increases, strength increases. And also, you did mention something that a lot of people overlook, which is the lack of standardization. So a lot of times when I get programs and I'm looking at a consultation, it'll say, it's honestly, sometimes the type of programs that I look over in my consultations, it is a clusterfuck. And that is the only way that I can describe it, to be honest with you. It is, there's different exercises, especially on lower body training. It's like 8 to 10 exercises. It's the same rep scheme. So it's 4 sets of 12 to 15. It's a drop set at the end of every single set. It's a lot of redundant exercises. So utilizing the same movement patterns. So we have 3 different squat patterns, 4 different lunges. Like, it is just so redundant in terms of the actual muscle fibers that they're actually targeting and what areas that you're actually hitting. But within that, the drop sets, a lot of times people, like I had mentioned previously, they're really trying to chase fatigue rather than increasing the stimulus that they're actually getting. So I'm much more of an advocate, and this is actually a training paradigm switch that I make with many of my females, is actually getting them to do 2 things. First of all, to utilize mostly straight sets, meaning that we're going to have one set where you're going to take it close to failure, and then you're going to have a resting pattern. And then I also utilize longer rest periods with a lot of my women, because another thing that I see them do is they rush the rest interval. So it's almost like they always want to be doing something. They're just very antsy. They want to be going from exercise to exercise. And that's why they like doing drop sets, or they like doing supersets, or they like doing giant sets where they're combining. It kind of emulates a circuit style workout. And yes, you're going to feel cardiometabolic fatigue, and you're going to feel sweaty and hot, and you're going to feel like you got a great workout, but you really didn't get a sufficient stimulus on those muscles that you were utilizing or that you were looking to target. And so within that, a lot of times people are very focused on quantity over quality. And yes, there are many routes to get to hypertrophy. There are many roads to Rome, but really, I really try to get across to my clientele that we want to focus on getting the maximum out of the minimum. So getting the most out of the least, and then building up from there. You should only be utilizing higher volumes or intensity techniques and adding things on if you need a greater stimulus to induce a greater adaptation. But if you have yet to build any muscle and you're doing 30, 40 sets per week per muscle group, and I have many women that have come to me in the state where they can't build their glutes, they can't build their delts, they're doing 40 to 50 sets, and they label it as a working set in their program that they send me over, but they're actually not getting a great stimulus from those sets, because most of the time they're very low intensity sets. So they're far away from failure. So they're not getting a good stimulus from each set, and they're just inducing more and more fatigue, which is just leaving them. Honestly, a lot of times they feel trashed the rest of the day. So it's almost like those CrossFitters where they do a couple wads and they really blow their load like early on, and then they're trashed the rest of the day sitting on a couch and burning less calories as a result. So I really try to get focus. I try to get a lot of my clients to focus on the quality of the stimulus rather than the quantity.
Yeah, that's kind of leading into, as you mentioned, the junk exercise selection, where people are giving, like, in an upper body day, there are people doing 3 different, well, not 3, it's usually like 5 different variations of pull downs and vertical exercises, and then all these different rows, and then people having, like, especially if they do the bro split, and then there's a million different like pressing exercises, which I don't actually see with females, because females tend to avoid all sorts of pressing exercises because I don't want to train the chest, which I would argue is a terrible route to go down, because you need your chest, like, you need pressing to be balanced with the pulling, but obviously you need, well, I think more pulling would be a lot more beneficial, but it's just like the pressing exercises also leads to you engaging your delts, engaging all these other things. It's just how you go about it. Like, you don't need to do bench press and incline bench press and all these other things, but it's like there are probably a couple of exercises that you would want to keep into your week to at least provide some balance there. Because in the end of it, it's just like, okay, what are you wanting to achieve out of this? Your upper body is a big bang for buck thing, being able to press yourself up from something is a functional movement pattern. But the main gist of junk exercise selection is that aside from the overkill of repetitive movements, there's also the whole, this isn't just junk exercise selection, it's people not understanding what is effective because they kind of attach that word to them feeling the muscles more. And it's not to say there's nothing wrong with hip thrusts, because hip thrusts are amazing-ish, depending how you use them. But then there's the cable kickbacks, there's the booty band around the legs, there's the let's add the booty band to the squat as well. Let's thrust the hips at the top of a squat. Let's thrust the hips at the top of a deadlift. Let's thrust the hips here where there is no movement pattern. And there's this, I'm sorry, but I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I want to know your thoughts, but I think it's absolutely ridiculous. There's this new, I bet you Brett, it might be a Brett thing, I don't know, but there is this device where you're sitting down in a chair and you stand up like this and you feel your glute squeeze, like at the top of a squat, except you feel it more because there's like a plate that is under you. And then as you stand up, the plate comes behind you, but it's called a booty builder, but you're standing up like this. And there are so many people now treating that like a hip thrust. And I'm like, but you do realize that gravity is not that way, and you're feeling your glute squeeze, and that's kind of just like training your quads in a sense, because the way that you're kind of applying the load is your knee extending. But it's like people just, I just wanted to bring that in because like people attach effective with feeling, when we know in literature that lengthened exercises are where most of the muscle is built. But we don't want to neglect the shorter ones like hip thrusts or glute extensions, but sprinkling them in here and there is actually really beneficial because they're not as fatiguing and they kind of complete the strength spectrum. But at the same time, it's just like, if you are only training 2 times, 3 times a week, we might need a little bit better exercise selection, but just understanding that feel doesn't mean the most effective. So I'll let you take that off there because I know there's nuance to everything that I've said, because I can nuance everything I said too, but I just wanted to lay it out.
Yeah, so I got to be honest, I'm not familiar with the exercise that you're alluding to, but you just did an execution and it really does look like a shortened overload movement. So essentially what you're, trying to get at is that it isn't lengthened bias. So it isn't really putting a lot of force and tension in that lengthened position. And I'm going to just say this in general, because I think in the last couple of years, I've been in the industry a long time, over 15 years at this point, and we always have these sexy new things that come around, and sometimes it's nutrition related and sometimes it's training related. And within the last couple of years, it has been the lengthened, literature. Now, I want to make a huge caveat because I'm very big into scientific review, into looking to the literature. But to be honest with you, when we get all these studies about training and about hypertrophy, I really look at the meta-analysis. And the reason for that is because that is an all-encompassing view of the body of literature on a specific topic. However, when you actually compare the training literature, and this is why I don't often talk about training literature, it's a crapshoot, to be honest with you. And really when it comes, Ruby, there?
Can you see that?
Hold on.
I'm gonna wait.
Cut out.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Yeah, you cut out.
Oh damn it! I was trying to show you something. Can I quickly link you something in the?
Send it to my Instagram. Are we still recording?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. All right. So I thought we completely lost the podcast. No worries. All right. So when I was just referencing the fact that I am a big advocate of scientific literature. I believe in being an evidence-based or evidence-informed practitioner where I combine my experience in the trenches as well as what I see in the evidence and within the literature. But a lot of times when we actually look into the training literature, what we have to realize is that there is no standardization. And this is not to poo-poo the guys that are in the trenches doing the work. I have a massive amount of respect for them. But I want you guys, if you actually are into scientific literature and you're a coach, like this is what I actually do. I look at not only the abstracts, but I look at the methods, methodology. I look at the population sample. I look at the exact study protocol. And if you actually look into scientific literature and you look at training studies, none of them look the same. They're testing completely different training programs and protocols, and they're just on very specific populations. Whereas if we actually look at the nutrition literature, which is really why I kind of keep my foot mostly in the nutrition world, because there's much better evidence, to be honest with you. There have been, if we look, we have dozens, we have over 30 studies looking directly in metabolic ward studies, meaning calorie controlled metabolic studies, which are calorie equating and protein equating things. We have low carb versus high carb. We have over 30 studies that have been meta-analyzed under those same provisions that see that this is, the essentially elicit equivalent outcomes. If you actually look at the meta-analysis by Hall et al., 2017, they actually found a little bit slight advantage to high carb, low fat, but that's not going to be like practically meaningful. When it comes down to actually training, we're looking at all these different protocols. And I think that what has really gotten lost in translation is we need to look at literature, we need to look at research as providing principles that just guide us and they point us in the right direction. They will never, and I've had Eric Helms on my podcast many times, who is a prolific researcher in and of himself. And he always says, he's got this podcast, Iron Culture, and it goes out on Mondays. He always says, research, especially hypertrophy training research, will never tell you how to train on a Tuesday. And the reason for that is because they're utilizing so many different protocols. So yeah, there's a lot of principles that we can look to, looking at sufficient volume and sufficient relative intensity, which is your proximity to failure, sufficient loading ranges. We can look at the fact that, yes, right now within the literature, we are seeing an advantage to lengthen bias movements. However, if you actually look into those reviews, they're mostly done on untrained populations. So it may not last for the entirety of someone's career, but I do think taking a more balanced approach to program design is what's going to elicit the best results for the individual. And I think a lot of times, and I think that this rubs off on the general population, training right now is in like this era where it's become overly complicated. People are arguing over, different subdivisions of muscles and this person's little, biomechanical advantage and things of that sort. And these are great principles to know, but I think it causes more confusion than it does clarity for the individual. So really, when it comes down to it, if you don't mind me going into it, there's some training mistakes that I see that I think we can really navigate on this podcast that are going to be more applicable to everyone out there. Because if we could look at these exercises and we could, break it down biomechanically, but it's not helping the vast majority of people.
Yeah, but that was the main point that I was the main point that I was trying to get at with that is essentially that it's the most effective exercises are ones that you can load, ones that feel best for you. And it's why I say, for me, a squat is a great glute movement because I have such long femurs. My squat leads to me having such a good morning looking squat. Whereas to someone that doesn't have a squat that looks like that, they're not going to get a lot of glute benefits out of it, and there are better exercises. And also I can push my squats to failure. Most people can't push something like that to failure. So what are the best exercises? The ones that have some sort of stability, because if balance is an issue, if grip and heart rate are an issue, if your brain is an issue, like mentally, then it's not going to get you the best bang for your buck. It's what are the best effective exercises for you? Doing a shitload of kickbacks isn't. Doing most of your program as step-ups probably isn't either, because you're not able to tell me that you can load a high box step-up progressively over time with a lot of stimulus. It's a great exercise, but what can you load with a lot of weight that effectively gets the glutes? A Bulgarian split squat, a single leg press. Yes, step-ups are great, but you don't want to have 3 different step-ups in your program when you could have something else in there that you can load a lot more and get a lot more bang for your buck with, which is kind of my view on it. It's you can't really load a kickback all that much. Yes, it's great, absolutely, but people are overusing kickbacks these days. I don't even do kickbacks. I don't think I've ever done kickbacks because it's just I don't feel it in my glute, number one. Number two, I can hardly load the thing. I would rather do a single leg glute extension or a single leg Bulgarian or a single leg something else where I'm feeling it. I'm able to load the movement a lot more than a 2.5 pin or a 7 pin or a 12 pin on the cable thing with all this excessive body movement that I see most people doing it with. But what works best for you? What works best for your body? You might feel that using a hip thrust machine is the worst thing for you because all you get is quads, but you might find the barbell better, or you might find that you don't feeling doesn't necessarily mean that the muscle isn't working, but it's like you might not get the benefits of a hip thrust the same way that you get the benefits of something like an RDL or a glute extension or a glute hyper on a GHD. Like, there are different ways to skin a cat, but it's the same principles regardless. What can you effectively load? What can you then effectively progressively add stimulus to? What can you then factor into your whole program where it's balancing this stimulus and fatigue, and what has most stability? So that kind of like covers up that one, unless you want to have anything more to add to that. And I
No,
would say the biggest thing that a lot of people make as a mistake is not filming their lifts in some sense, because you don't know if there's anything you need to adjust, if you're doing anything wrong, and just in general, like, where does filming your lifts and what other mistakes would you bring into this? Because that's kind of like the last one on the list, aside from not focusing on what muscles are working and then taking it close to failure, which I guess watching yourself, if you film yourself, is just like that last rep moved at the same speed as the first one. And maybe I'm not actually taking it close to failure. And you might also realize that you're not actually focusing on the muscles that are working because you're feeling your quads in something that you should be feeling something else in. So let's kind of come to where can filming come into this and what other mistakes do you see, so we can tie a bow on the training aspect.
absolutely. So I do, it's very interesting because I work with a lot of women and I find that especially newer trainees, they're very reluctant to film their sets because sometimes it comes from just feeling, self-conscious, or they don't want to be that person in the gym. And I always try to encourage them, like, listen, we're trying to get better. I want you to stay in your own lane, really focus on your own performance. If you want to put it, kind of hide your camera against a water bottle or something, like, it's all good and well. But really what that's for is, it's not for me to judge you. It's for me to be able to give you objective feedback, because yes, it's great to film your sets, but unless you are like Ruby, I know you film your sets and you're able to look back on your own, actual execution and how close to failure were and be more objective with yourself. A lot of people can't be. They need a professional in their corner. They need a coach that's going to be able to help them and say, listen, you got to take it to the house. And I'm going to give you a great example of this. One of my advanced clients, Jeremiah Bear, and I'll never forget the first time that he sent me videos. And I was like, he's got great execution. He is very proficient at training. He has been training well over 10 years, and he's a very accomplished coach. So I don't want anyone to take this out of context, but I said, you got more. I know for a fact you got more. Like, I've seen your training videos, and I know that you had more reps in the tank. I remember him just kind of like taking a step back, and, we get on Zoom a lot, and he was like, I didn't expect you to tell me that, but you know what? You're right. And it took someone he respected to just challenge him and say, listen, I think you got more in that. And honestly, Jeremiah is one individual that has gained, first of all, a ton of tissue in the we've been working together 22 months at this point, so almost 2 years. But I remember when we first got him started, we were doing incline Smith machine press, and I can't do the conversions right now in my head because in kilograms, but he was doing 185, which is essentially what we would look at. If you looked at it on the actual bar, it would look like 225. He has increased his incline press for reps using the same rep range. He's increased it 60 pounds. So he has come an immensely long way, especially for someone that came to me already having trained 10 years. But that's because every single week I had him send me over key performance indicating movements, meaning we had certain movements for each body part that we heavily focused on. And I wanted to see a set every single week. That's week in and week out for 22 months. And we've worked on his execution. We've worked on pushing him closer to failure. And then it's also allowed me to see things that were coming up that were limiting factors. So it helped us prevent injuries. It helped me be able to assess when a deload was necessary. So filming your sets is really advantageous to be able to track your progression over time. But I'll tell you, there's a couple other mistakes, and it kind of works into this, that I see personally. And I'm just going to give you a broad-based perspective because I work with a ton of different individuals, and I see people all the way from, lower, newer individuals to very advanced trainees. And this applies to everyone, to be honest with you. So there's a few training related mistakes that I see many make during a building phase. And these are things that can definitely hinder their muscle growth. So the first one is simply not training hard enough. I know everyone out there says, yeah, I train really hard. We got to be objective about this. A lot of people are not training in a manner that's actually resulting in progressive overload. And as Ruby, you alluded to, a lot of people, they kind of bastardize the the term progressive overload. Progressive overload is an indication that you've made adaptations from your training. It is the result. It is not, we're not chasing progressive overload. Progressive overload is an outcome of actually progressive and stimulative training. However, you need to realize that your training needs to become more challenging over time to present your body and that specific muscle with an adequate stimulus that forces your body to adapt. So you need to meet a sufficient intensity threshold. Now, I want to make this very clear because sometimes people hear me say these things and they take it out of context. I'm not saying by any means that you have to train each and every single workout and every single set to failure. However, you do need to train close to failure and you need to know where your limits lie. So this is where learning how to get to failure and actually pushing yourself to that threshold is really advantageous because you're never going to know your limits unless you push yourself to there. And how do you know what a 3 reps in reserve set is? How do you know what a 2 reps in reserve set is? How do you know what one, rep away from failure is if you've never pushed to true failure? So that is a skill, and that is a thing within programming that you need to be able to utilize and you need to incorporate. And so what I have most of my clients do is I spend the majority of their time training 0 to 2 reps in reserve, but I'm talking about a true 0 to 2 reps in reserve. And the only reason I know that it's a true 0 to 2 reps in reserve is because I've had them calibrate that based on me pushing them to failure during specific weeks within their mesocycle. So there are weeks which I'll tell them, I want you to take it to the house. And I'm going to get a video of you doing this. And so what I really want to see is rep speed drop off, because when we see velocity, rep velocity slow down, here's the thing. Your reps from an execution perspective should look pretty uniform. So I don't want to see like your first couple reps look perfect execution, and then you're doing like these half reps, you know what I mean? Or you're doing very poorly executed and your technique is all off during the latter portion of your set. They should look very similar in terms of the actual full execution of the motion. However, your reps should be getting progressively slower over time. If your reps from, say you're doing a 10 rep set, if rep 1 and rep 10 moved at the same speed, you're nowhere close to failure. Until we start seeing that bar slow or that weight slow, or your actually body mechanics slow down, although you're pushing the maximum force possible. So this means you're not purposely slowing this down and doing these slow eccentrics. You are trying to exert the maximum amount of force possible, but you just physically cannot push yourself, cannot move the bar or cannot move the weight at a fast speed. That is when we know that you're getting full motor unit recruitment and that you're close to failure. The other thing is, and you had mentioned this previously, this is another thing I see quite commonly, is a lot of people sacrifice quality for quantity and they keep their sets too far from failure. So they're basically just accumulating junk volume that accumulates fatigue, but actually doesn't provide them with a strong enough growth stimulus. And this is why I like to have clients report back on how they feel after their workouts and in between sessions in terms of their perceived recovery and their actually fatigue levels and their level of difficulty during a session. So I want, like, there's certain parameters that I want to go through with people. And this is what these are the conversations I have with clients. But I really, for those out there, what I would suggest is you should feel like when you leave the gym, you should feel like you did something. You shouldn't feel like you just went through the motions. There's a lot of people that they leave the gym after their session and they're really not feeling any different way than they felt when they walked in. So think about it like this. If you leave the gym after your session and, later that day or the next day, you feel like you could repeat the same session you just did and actually perform the same quality session again, it's an indicator that you didn't train hard enough in your first session. You should not, like, I've had certain clients that have come to me and said, hey, I think I can do 2-a-days. If I fit them into my schedule, what do you think? And I'm like, if you're able to do a 2-a-day, that means you didn't push yourself hard enough in that first session. I automatically get videos from them. So that's just like a gut check. And then from a difficulty perspective, you should feel challenged during your workouts. Unless it's a deload week or it's an introductory mesocycle when you just start with a coach, you should feel like you're challenging yourself. You're challenging the muscle, the target musculature that you're utilizing and targeting with that exercise. It should, like, a workout should never feel like a walk in the park. But at the same time, and I have to make these caveats because I work with such a wide demographic of individuals. So I have like your Lifestyle Lisa and your Gen Pop Gym, but then I also have IFBB pros that literally bury themselves, and that I wouldn't say overtraining, because if you actually look into the overtraining literature, it's almost next to impossible to actually overtrain from a physiological perspective. But these are people that bury themselves to the point where it's actually more of a hindrance than a help to their progress. So they overdo things. So I always have to make this very delineated difference is your workout shouldn't feel like a walk in the park, but at the same time, you shouldn't feel like you have to drag yourself off the floor just to get out of the gym. So this is where we need to find this balance between what's going to maximize the stimulus and what's going to minimize the fatigue. And then honestly, this is probably the biggest mistake I see within the general population. And this isn't to call anyone out, but I will say that this is a lot of my general population clients in terms of the women that I work with that come to me initially, is that they change their training too often. And this is the biggest thing with this. I find that many people suffer from shiny object syndrome, and they chase novelty within their training rather than focusing on progressing the training stimulus over time. So instead of focusing on getting progressively stronger and really executing better over time, they're more focused on entertainment and really trying to emulate what this influencer did on their swipe workout, Tuesday morning. And I feel like a lot of people trick themselves into thinking they've made progress by chasing new and novel exercises that leave them feeling sore. And these allow them to make quick increases in weight during the first few weeks of using them. But many fail to realize that the load and rep progressions that they're seeing, or the increases that they're seeing, are neural adaptations. So when you've started new exercises, the first couple of weeks of utilizing that new exercise, you're really just making neurological adaptations. So that is more from a central nervous system perspective. You're not actually gaining increases in muscle, or you're not seeing increases in contractile tissue. And generally, these same individuals will say that they change up their training and their exercises to confuse the muscle. And they don't want their body, this is often like, I'm always asking, I always want to know the why. So I'm like, listen, why do you always change? Like, I'll ask for a training program. They're like, well, I change my training program every week. So often in order to understand someone, I want to know where they're coming from. So I'll ask them, why do you do that? And a lot of times they'll tell me that they don't want their body to get accustomed to their workouts. But what you have to realize is that hypertrophy, muscle hypertrophy, is an adaptation. So the whole point of training is for the body to adapt to the stimulus we provide it with and grow as a result. And again, give it more of that stimulus to elicit more of a growth response. So it's really important to realize that building muscle requires repetition. And it requires you doing things again and again and getting better at those same movements, exercises, and workouts over time. And that's what's going to help you grow muscle. And really, when it comes down to it, like, the issue with changing up exercises and variables too often is it doesn't allow us to properly collect data and get good at movements, but it also doesn't let us objectively track and gauge the progress you're making across a training cycle. And I got to be honest with you, Ruby, I work with a lot of coaches. So I coach a lot of coaches, and I also get a lot of clients from other coaches. And this is something that isn't just, those in the general population aren't just guilty of. There's a lot of coaches that are guilty of doing this within their programming, because they program their clients in a manner where they essentially give a client a new program, a new training program every 3 to 4 weeks, and they're switching things up. And by doing this, they're kind of tricking their client to progressing on new exercises. So they're basically seeing newbie gains on these different exercises. But if they actually look, and I've done this with individuals, and I have asked them, there's certain individuals that have come to me from other coaches, and they're like, well, I change my workouts every 4 weeks. This is what my coach does for me. And I said, all right, well, how long were you working with that coach? And sometimes it's 12 months. Let's just give the average is 12 months. All right, well, how much strength and how much muscle did you gain over those 12 months? And usually they've made minimal progress in terms of building actual muscle tissue. So you should be training in a manner where you're doing the same movements you've mastered week after week and aiming for progressions in performance on them, so you can objectively track your progress. And you can always also pinpoint where you need to bring things up, or where you need to work, harder and more strategically on. And then from there, you need to assess how you're responding to your current training program and use that feedback to make the necessary adjustments to make progress moving forward, rather than just hopping from one program to another every month or two. And another, like, just a little subsect of that, this is something that I really would suggest people do, but I feel like a lot of people don't do, because I ask this question with many people that I interact with and that I consult with, is a lot of people make the mistake of not logging their training. And I see this in the gym. I see this with clients that come to me. I rarely see people log booking. I'll see people in the gym, they sit there, they're talking, they're chatting in between sets, they're on Instagram, but they're not tracking anything, which is one thing that holds them back from pushing themselves enough to make progress. Because in order to get the most progress possible, whether that be in training or in nutrition, you need to track what you're doing. If you're not logging your sessions in some form, how are you going to know that you're actually progressing your lifts? Because most people can't remember what loads and reps they used the day after a session, let alone the next week when they go to repeat that session. And even more so month after month. So this is why I'm a big believer in having clients track their training, but also reporting back to me on specific aspects of their training on a week-to-week basis. So I want to know what your training performance was like. What are your pumps like? What were your soreness like? Like, I want to get these performance indicators back from them so that I'm able to make the proper adjustments and to ensure that they're heading in the right direction.
My favorite. Okay. What people feel like if they're not getting sore anymore, or if something plateaus, that it's redundant and they should change the exercise because it's not working anymore. And this is the part that I love the most, because people do not realize that in the first 3, 4, 5 weeks, depending on where you are in the spectrum of training age, that is your brain, like you said, your neural adaptations to that exercise. That is not muscle morphology with your muscle. Well, there might be a little bit, but it's not going to be all that much in compared to what you actually are chasing. And it irks me that there are these challenges and programs that are always, especially the training apps, they're
Mhm.
dishing out new programs every 4 weeks because it's keeping people on the app. It's keeping people paying that person for that app, for that program. But it's not only the apps, like you said, it's coaches. Coaches are trying to entertain their clients, trying to keep them on board, trying to get money off them, trying to just appease their interest. Because if I don't change their program up, what am I actually giving them value for? Well, you're getting them results. That is why they're
That's the
paying.
biggest thing.
Yeah, it
I
irks
always
me.
so I have a lot of clients that come to me from other coaches, and I do these analytics, so I could share this with you. Every year I analyze how many coaches, because I'm the person that people come to kind of fix things, to be honest with you. So a lot of times people come to me, they're very experienced. And in 2022, the average person that came to me, the average person that hired me for coaching had an average of 5.6 coaches. So we could just round it up to 6 coaches prior to contacting me. In 2023, I always run these analytics every year at the beginning of the year. It was the average person that came and worked with me and hired me had worked with 5.1 coaches prior to me. So I get a large demographic of people that are experienced. They've invested a lot of money, but they haven't gotten the results they're looking for, despite investing in coaching. And often there are some certain commonalities. And there are things that I'm very observant about. And I have a very detailed intake form, especially when someone is very experienced, having invested a ton of money, a ton of time, and they still haven't gotten where they want to be. They've been spinning the wheels, spending a lot of money, spending a lot of time, energy, and effort. And they have these self-limiting beliefs, but they also have there's certain commonalities in how they were coached previously. And so I noticed certain holes in other coaches. And this isn't to speak down about other coaches. I just want to elucidate the fact that you might see this as common, but just because something's common and normal doesn't mean it's appropriate or it's actually optimal. So yes, we have a lot of coaches that they kind of feel, and I consult with a lot of other coaches in terms of, I help them from an educational perspective. And often they'll ask me like, how often should I be training programs? And I give them the feedback that it's based on the individual. So you shouldn't be just, completely changing a training program just to keep someone on your team. Because I always have these conversations with my clients. I say, listen, did you hire me to make progress and to break through the plateaus you had in the past, or did you hire me to get entertained? Because if you want that, you can get a training app and you don't need individualized coaching. If you truly want to make progress, we need to standardize what we're doing, and we need to isolate variables and make changes in isolation to really see how your body responds and adapts to what we're doing. And so this isn't about just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. That's kind of like a shotgun approach to coaching. I really like taking a sniper approach. I like making very calculated adjustments based off someone's biofeedback and how their body's responding and developing over time, and making sure that the adjustments and the changes that I make are suited for that individual, and it's something that person's going to be able to implement. Other thing, I don't know if you want to get into this because this really goes down the rabbit hole, but soreness is such a poor indicator of actual muscle growth, and this is something that so many people within the general population think. If you actually look into like the different subsects of the industry, you'll see a lot of people debate this, and there really is no debate if you look into the literature. So I want to make this very clear. Muscle soreness is not correlated with muscle growth. Yes, it is a byproduct of mechanical tension. So yes, with mechanical tension, you will get muscular damage, which can induce soreness. However, we have not one study that shows that soreness actually leads to muscle growth. So soreness can be a byproduct of hard stimulative training or of certain exercises. So for instance, if you do a lot of eccentric overloading or you do lengthened bias movements, an RDL is going to induce much more soreness than is a leg curl, because of the fact that the leg curl is a short bias movement and the RDL is a lengthened bias movement, and it induces a lot more muscle damage. However, soreness by itself is not a mechanism of hypertrophy. And a lot of people mistake this. They see like Brad Schoenfeld's 2010 master's thesis, which showed the 3 mechanisms of hypertrophy, which was mechanical tension, muscular damage, and metabolic stress. And honestly, if you look in the literature, the updated literature, muscle damage has kind of been like disproven and thrown out with the like the bathtub. essentially. And so if you actually look in the literature on muscle soreness, we see that even in vastly different amounts of soreness, we don't see greater hypertrophy. So for instance, there's a really immensely great, like well done study by Flan et al. And what they looked at was, let's utilize the same amount of training volume, but compress it over different time periods to induce different levels of soreness. So in one protocol, what they did was a 3-week introductory mesocycle where they ramped people up. So they started low and ramped and slowly increased their volume so that their total cumulative volume was done over 11 weeks. And then in another group, this was the soreness group, they threw them right into like the trenches. So they did all the volume that the group in 11 weeks did in 8 weeks. So induced much greater levels of muscle damage and much higher levels of soreness. However, when you actually look at the hypertrophy outcomes at the end of the interventions, they got the same exact hypertrophy outcomes. So despite the fact that the group that had the 8-week intervention that did much more training volume and induced a lot more muscle damage, a lot more soreness, and even if you look at like their CK values, their CRP like levels, like even on their blood markers, they were drastically higher than the other group because the other group was able to do an introductory microcycle or 3 weeks of an introductory microcycle, and they got the repeated bout effect. So they were able to get those protective mechanisms set in place where that's why over time period, if you guys notice, the first couple of weeks that you do a training program, if you stay on that program, you'll be sore. However, as weeks go by, even though you're pushing yourself harder, your soreness actually dissipates. You get less and less soreness. And that's because of a phenomenon called the repeated bout effect. That is an adaptation that comes from progressive training and doing the same movements where your body sets in protective mechanisms to help limit the damage that you have over time. And you actually look at like the literature on untrained individuals versus trained individuals, we actually see much less muscle damage in trained individuals, despite the fact that they're training much harder. So we actually don't get as much muscle protein breakdown once you're trained because of these adaptations that set in. So a lot of people are chasing soreness. I'll have a lot of clients come to me and say, I'm not feeling as sore as I used to. And I'm like, okay, I hear you out. But are you getting good pumps in that muscle that we're targeting? Yes. Are you getting greater performance increases week on and week out? Yes. Are we actually seeing adaptations in terms of strength, in terms of recovery capacity? Are you feeling better in the gym? Like how is your scale weight going up over time? Things of that sort. And all the correlates of muscle growth are going up except soreness. So we need to stop focusing on that.
I love how you just said the scale going up as well. Sorry, I had to kind of interject.
No, absolutely. And that is par for the course. I mean, you're not going to diet yourself into a more muscular body. And that is just a fact of the matter. But a lot of people will mistake the soreness and think that they need to chase that. And that's what a lot of people have done. They've done a bunch of damage. So they do a bunch of junk volume or they do things that induce a high level of soreness, not realizing that that's not actually inducing a hypertrophy stimulus. Now, at the other, I want to play both sides of the spectrum and both sides of the coin. If you're never getting sore, you may not be pushing yourself enough. So I'm not saying that soreness is a bad thing or that soreness is completely antithetical to hypertrophy. What I'm saying is soreness is not a great indication that you are inducing hypertrophy. However, soreness does often come for the ride with hard stimulative training, especially if you do a lot of length and overload work. So I will say with a lot of my clients, I kind of bias more of the movements and the exercises that I select within their programming towards lengthened movements, just because we do have literature that shows lengthened movements are more hypertrophic set per set versus shortened bias movements. So I'm going to have someone utilizing more squat patterns than I am leg extensions. However, just because something is correlated doesn't mean it's causal. So just because hard stimulative training is correlated with soreness doesn't mean that soreness is the direct mechanism that's causing you to gain muscle.
Yeah. And I would also argue that soreness can, if anything, lead to decomposition if it then leads to your subsequent performances getting worse. And not only that, think about it. What do you do when you're sore? I just want to rest. I just want to lie down. I just want to do this. So your little surplus or your maintenance is now going to be a huge surplus because you might be trashing yourself in the gym, but that doesn't dictate what your metabolism is doing because your metabolism is mostly dictated by what you do outside of the gym. And now you're planted on your ass because you're too sore to get up to do the usual things that you do. And you're hardly even fidgeting to get in the knee. So you have to think about all the cascade effects that happen from getting yourself too sore because you're trying to chase this. And because I used to do it all the time, I know this, but you're trying to annihilate the muscle. And my very first coach said to me, you want to stimulate, not annihilate yourself. And it stuck with me ever since. This was back in 2015. I was like horrible for this. I used to do like 100 sets on the leg press, drop sets, this, that, and the other, getting someone to help me get eccentric failure by pushing it up. And then it didn't lead to, like, I had no standardization. Number one, it didn't lead to, well, yes, okay, this is where a lot of people say, I did see my body change for like a couple of months, but then there was nothing. It's like things work until they don't. And then what? You're not going to want to then pull something back because it's just like, oh, if I start eating more, I'm just going to get fat because I'm maintaining right now. Oh, if I just pull my exercises back, I'm going to lose muscle. I'm going to lose progress. And that is a thought that a lot of people have, which I think we can sum this up with the biggest mistake of all is actually, I want to quickly touch on the logbook. Logbooks are not just for you to write weights down. If write down how it feels. Maybe something you might need to tweak the next week. I try to get my girls to use it as a journal, to use it as a diary for themselves, because you should be resting in between your sets. So use that to write detailed notes, to treat it like this is how I'm feeling right now. Maybe this happened yesterday. You can talk about different things in that journal because things outside of the gym impact your performance in the gym. And also it takes the focus away from just physique, just scale weight, just this I'm chasing small. Because now all that focus, all that stress, all that energy is going into everything that you're feeling in the gym, how muscles feel, how exercises feel. It's putting a lot more emphasis on things that grow you, things that are going to build the physique that you want, because chasing a scale number will never do that. You can't diet your way to a muscular physique. Focus on what matters. My quote, my favorite quote is, I should trademark it, but it's like performance drives physique. Performance drives physique, and not just performance in the gym. It's performance in your everyday life. Performance, do you have energy to perform outside of the gym? Performance drives physique. You eat to train better, to train harder. You eat to perform, and you perform to transform. That's like the biggest thing. But I wanted to tie the bow on the biggest muscle building mistake, which we can allude to probably in a second episode of like nutrition stuff, because we're not going to get to it on this.
To be honest, and just so the audience knows, Ruby and I had 7 topics planned for today, and we've gotten through 1. So you guys got a part 2 coming, and it's going to be a hot one.
It's going to be fire. But the biggest mistake, which we will feed into the nutrition aspect of this as well, is people don't stay in the building phase long enough, and it's kind of leading into this whole like they try to build muscle, like we said, because of that dieting aspect. They said they're trying to build muscle, they're trying to get all these performance increases, but they're not matching it with that protein. They're not matching it with the time that it takes to build muscle. Whereas fat loss, you can actually see results really freaking fast if you do it the right way. It's just that most people are dieting the wrong way. They've spent their whole life mentally dieting, if not physically dieting. Like, how can we create this like bridge into episode number 2 on how important a coach is, which I just kind of touched on so many different things there. But I think the coach part here is the most important part, which we will talk about, not staying in a building phase for long enough. We will talk about the nutrition. We will talk about the mindset. We will talk about more other mistakes that people make that aren't training related when it comes to building the physique that you want. But most of that, it's really hard to see ourselves. And most of what we spoke about today, it's really hard to see ourselves because emotions will always win over logic. PMS week will always win over logic. How you feel one day, the fight with your spouse, the kids troubling you will always win over logic because we're human beings. We are irrational. So maybe we can sum up this aspect, alluding to some of next topic's aspects on how a coach fits into this piece and where you've seen changes within your own clients. Because I know that I've seen extreme changes in my clients once they've started training hard, which maybe had like it probably could have taken a year for some, but it has taken months for some to really get the use of training freaking hard through the different modalities that I put into their program, through the different rep schemes that I'm like, no, we want to see what training hard feels like. And them wanting to change programs at week 4, but no, pushing them. and them actually seeing, hey, wow, I have so much more in the tank. What the hell? I was underselling myself. Take it away.
Yeah, so this is honestly a topic I could riff on for a long time. So I'll try not to be too long winded. But honestly, at this point, I've coached over 1,100 clients over the last 11 years. And one of the main reasons I'm such an advocate, and you'll hear me talk about this often with in our own private conversations. I'll talk about this. I'll post this on my clients' posts. I am such a big advocate of coaching because we are often our own biggest bottleneck. And we can often get in our own way, which limits the progress we can make, which is where having a coach who's a qualified fitness professional in your corner can help you maximize your progress and minimize the headaches and stress involved with the process of transforming your physique. So that can go anywhere between handling your own diet, your training, your supplementation, your cardio, and all aspects that go into programming for physique development. And I also find coaching to be especially helpful for women. I know that's mostly your audience, but I will say that I find it to be especially helpful for women when they're trying to build muscle, as for so many, this process can be both unfamiliar and super uncomfortable for them. And if we really think about it, like our society and especially the media, at least when I was growing up, made it for that women felt like they always needed to be working towards being a smaller, lighter version of themselves. And I work with a ton of women between the ages of, say, 35 to 55 who have never in their lives dedicated a time to going through a strategic building phase. So it's something that they don't have experience doing. They don't know how to execute it properly. And they also fear the process and haven't been able to go through it successfully on their own. So if there isn't the guidance of someone with experience and with empathy and with compassion, like a coach, to guide them through it, they're going to be much less likely to engage in it, and even less likely than that to actually succeed in it. And so I always try to tell my coaches or my clients that my coaching style goes far beyond the X's and O's in nutrition and training, meaning it's just not about the calories and macros in nutrition and the sets and reps in the gym. And this is because I often find myself working on clients' mindsets to be able to put them into a position to succeed, because we cannot separate your psychology from your physiology as your body follows your brain. So a lot of coaching, a lot of, at least my coaching approach, centers around both education and empowerment. So first, I'm going to educate a client on what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how to do it. But beyond that, I aim to empower them through this education and also break down some of the misinformation they've come across, like we did on today's podcast. I want to discuss with them and help deconstruct some of the fears that they have around building muscle and becoming bulky, which honestly, women, ladies out there, that's not going to happen. Like I've been trying my whole life and I'm still not too bulky. So you never have to worry about that. And I also really try to break down the self-limiting beliefs that have held a lot of individuals back from going through the process in the past. And I'm also there to walk them through the processes. For many women, eating more and training in a manner to build muscle can seem like a scary process. But honestly, building phases are one of the most growth promoting phases I take clients through, both physically and mentally. And I found that through guiding my female clients through a productive building phase where they have gained muscle, they've minimized fat gain, they've gained a ton of strength and built up particular body parts, like say their glutes or their delts or their legs, like specific areas that they really wanted to focus on and they were always self-conscious about. By the end of that building phase, they see the benefits that investing a substantial period of time into building can provide them with. However, they don't just grow physically, but they also grow mentally. So often during those building phases, they learn to trust the process of not dieting for once and eating more food. They improve their relationship with food, and they now realize just how strong and capable they are, which helps to deconstruct the self-limiting beliefs they've had about their potential and their abilities. So taking my clients through a building phase is actually one of my favorite phases to work with them on, as I love to see how much physical and mental growth can occur during a phase where we focus on building your body instead of breaking it down. And really my goal, to be honest with you, and I know we discussed this on our last series, is I'm a huge advocate. And I say this to all my women, I say this to all my clients. We are going to be focusing on fueling properly and getting stronger and we're going to switch you from a mindset of restriction and subtraction into a mindset of abundance and addition. So I really want them to be able to take that on board, and oftentimes taking them through a very productive building phase where we focus on training and proper fueling, which we'll cover in the next podcast, is such an immensely beneficial experience for them, both physically in terms of the physique development that they derive from that process, but also the mental growth that they make through that process as well.
The mental growth of getting yourself to do hard things that you've never done before is insane. And we alluded to this at the start of the podcast, and pushing yourself beyond that failure point in the gym showing yourself that if you are actually putting such small self-imposed limits on yourself, it's empowering. And I used to have that as my slogan as well, educate and empower, because going through the process yourself is the best education you can do for yourself. It's the best form of empowerment. Too many people are stuck overthinking, asking too many questions. I think some people ask too many questions and want too many things optimized and, like, yeah, let's just say optimized, versus actually doing the thing and noticing the progress for themselves, realizing the results for themselves, because it doesn't matter what results you get and how far you go physically if mentally you have not done the work, if mentally you have not become a proper, like, you have not evolved as a person. Because body image is never about the body. Realizing your results is never about the results you actually get, because people are always chasing for more. You need to become the person in the process. And this is everything that we will be talking about on the next episode when we go into nutrition, when we go into mindset, when we go into the other mistakes that people make when trying to live a life that is like the life that you want to live, physique wise, mind wise, health wise, fitness wise, and feeling the benefits, versus never feeling like you're there yet and just cycling between the entertainment of more and more programs at the next flashy thing. So I think that kind of summarizes it all. Is there anything else you want to say to tie a bow on it? Or we
I
just
think you I think you nailed it, Ruby. But I will say that, audience, you have a lot in store coming to you. This is definitely, I don't think you and I can just do a one-parter ever. So we will have another part 2 because we have a lot of topics to get through. But as always, guys, Ruby, thank you so much for having me on. This was a very insightful and entertaining conversation. I hope that everyone out there realizes that, yes, we did kind of pick apart a lot of the mistakes we see, but this is also coming from a place of compassion. Like, I work with so many individuals, and Ruby, I know you do the same. We're not here to place judgment on anything any of you guys are doing. However, we do want to provide you with a path to be more aware of the mistakes you've made in the past or you're making currently, and just be able to rectify those mistakes so you can make progress moving forward. And without self-awareness and without awareness of what you're doing wrong, you don't know what you don't know. So if you aren't to be able to be educated and empowered through these type of conversations, you will continue to spin your wheels and doing the same things. And we're going to discuss in our next episode kind of about the why you need to stop dieting in order to build muscle. What are the benefits of muscle growth and things of that sort? Because a lot of people are holding back their true potential from a physique perspective by continuing to over and over and over, just going between these cyclical dieting cycles and never giving themselves enough time and putting enough time, energy, and effort into a building phase and really getting the benefits out of it. So that's going to be a hugely beneficial podcast to really add to this one. So this one was training related. Next one will be nutrition, mindset. And I'm sure that we'll throw a couple of extra topics in there because we went on a pretty big riff today. But, you guys can always reach me. I've done a full series on building phases on my podcast, which is Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast, which you guys can find on Spotify and iTunes. If you ever need me, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, which is @BrandonDeCruz_.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I highly suggest that you guys, if you have not yet listened to the last 4 episodes that we've done, go back and listen to those, because we have another, I would estimate another 2 parts coming at you based around this whole thing. So you have everything from your pre-diet phase to what you need to pay attention to for your diet breaks and for what happens after a diet, because too many people gain too much body fat after dieting because of the approach they take. And then we spoke more about exactly what happens when you're dieting too often for too long and going too hard. And then we spoke about the mistakes that people make when trying to optimize their physique with maintenance, with building their body within like fueling your training within maintenance, so that you can find the best of both worlds. And now we're kind of taking it into the next level, in which muscle is the most important thing that you should be aiming for. If a badass physique, looking like a sculpted goddess, is your goal. So with that, thank you guys for listening. And if you liked this podcast, please give it a 5-star rating. I'm trying to get them up to about 60. I think I'm at 45 at the moment, or 51. I don't remember the actual update, but that would mean the world to me. Go follow Brandon, share this on your stories, put your little spiel in it. I love seeing your takeaways. I love
And make sure to tag us. We love that.
Yeah, we do. And we love seeing the takeaways. That's why we share them, because it adds some context to everything that we do as well. So thank you guys for being loyal listeners, and I love you all. See ya.